So if you can just keep front of mind the fact that now that you are a manager, it's not what you can do, it's what you can help your team do. I think that's going to go a long way to make sure you don't let these superpowers of yours become your greatest weaknesses. Almost no one agrees with me on this, but I think that engineers have it in them to be the very best leaders and managers in an organization. However, if that's true, why do so many of them fail at it? I've been in some amazing organizations, worked with some amazing engineers. Some of them do great, but very often they fail. That's the problem I want to dive into today. Hi, if this is your first time on the show, my name is Matt Jertson. I am a former Air Force instructor pilot, former head of training and development at SpaceX, and now I run my own company called Better Everyday Studios, where we work with organizations to help their great engineers and technical individual contributors become great people managers. It's funny, that tagline that I just said, often I simplify it when I'm talking about Better Everyday Studios. And I just say, we help great engineers become great managers. And every time I say that, I get the same kind of reaction. I get a lot of groans. I get a lot of people from HR teams going, oh, right? So there's definitely this feel that generally engineers aren't going to be the best people managers. And I understand where that's coming from. I totally do, because I see it all the time. But I actually think engineers have some incredible superpowers that, if harnessed correctly, could make them fantastic managers. And so in the conversation today, we're going to break down into three parts. We're going to first talk about what those superpowers are. We're then going to talk about why those superpowers often become weaknesses. And then finally, we'll talk about the solution of how do you make sure that switch doesn't happen. What are their superpowers? I think there are three major superpowers that engineers have that will make them tremendous people managers. First, they have technical credibility. Their team will actually respect them based on the merits of the work that they have seen them do, right? It's very true. I was a pilot, and pilots, we naturally come up from you start out your co-pilot, and then you're an aircraft commander, and then you're an instructor pilot. So you just naturally move forward. And then at some point along the way, as you're moving forward as a pilot, there's this parallel track of leadership as an officer. And so you're kind of advancing forward. And I can tell you with 100% certainty that there was judgment there, right? If you weren't known as a great pilot, I'm going to question you a little bit more as leader. It doesn't mean they completely match. Somebody's a great leader, they're a great leader. But there was definitely some tension there. And if somebody can't fly, then it'd be really weird if you're leading a flying organization. That wouldn't happen in the military. And I think the same thing is true in organizations. If I'm on an engineering team, if we're doing some kind of analysis, and it's not that I necessarily expect you to be able to do everything, but especially at lower levels of leadership, if you have technical competence where you can really talk and teach some of the people on your team, there's going to be that higher level of respect. So the first superpower is that technical credibility. The second superpower is that engineers just naturally make very data-driven decisions. They don't necessarily get as swayed by emotion. They're not worried about, they can kind of block out personal differences, and they just say, okay, what does the data tell us? Let's make a good decision. I have seen firsthand engineers just yelling at each other about a problem, right? There's a problem, and they're just going at it. They're in a meeting room, voices are raised, tensions are raised, and then they come to an agreement, they leave the room, and they're best friends. And the reason that can happen is because they're able to separate the people stuff and the data stuff. We're having this data discussion. We're not going to focus on whatever else we think about each other, whether we like each other or we don't. Tremendous superpower to have for leaders to make those data-driven decisions. And then the third superpower is very often engineers kind of, as part of engineering, You learn to think in systems. You learn to think about complex ideas and complex systems and how all the different pieces interrelate to one another. And especially in today's world, that is essential. There are no simple problems anymore, especially, and the higher up you go in leadership, the more complex those systems become. And so understanding systems is essential. So those are the superpowers. How do those become weaknesses? So number one, the technical credibility, that can become, or technical excellence, that can become avoidance, right? In the Air Force, I say this a lot. I'm sorry if you've heard me say it before, but very often we always talk about how every leader is trying to do their last job, right? Every group commander is trying to be a squadron commander. Every wing commander is trying to be a group commander. And it's natural because it's comfortable, right? You knew your old job and now you're in an old job that you don't know. So I'm going to flee this uncertainty of this new job and go back to what I do know, which is that last thing. And so when an engineer becomes a manager, it's very easy for them to just focus in on the technical aspects of the job when there's any uncertainty if I'm not sure what I should be doing from a leadership role. So I'm just not going to do the leadership stuff. And instead, I'm going to focus on the technical stuff. That's bad, because they're not being a leader. Their job, sometimes they might still have individual contributor duties that they need to do, but if they're doing it at the expense of their manager duties, that's when it becomes a problem. The second superpower, the fact that they're data-driven, can sometimes mean they ignore the human side of problems, right? As a manager, you now need to deal with some of those people problems, and you're so focused on the data, on the technical stuff, if you're not keeping track of the emotions of your team, the well-being of your team, are there disagreements between these people? Are they able to work together? That can cause problems, because keeping track of that now is your responsibility as a people manager. And so if you don't focus on that, then these tensions, they go unresolved, they grow bigger and bigger, and the people problems in your team will quickly bubble up into something that you're no longer able to handle. And now you have to run to HR because you have an employee relations issue. And now that's bad because you're taxing them and you're causing a whole big thing, where if you were doing your job as a people manager, you could have solved it when it was much smaller. And so if you aren't handling that, if you're completely ignoring the people side of things, the emotional side of things, that's going to be a problem. And then the third thing, this power of being able to think in systems. Engineers can think all these amazing things. They're usually the best engineers that get promoted. And what can happen is now they're used to understanding stuff, but now they're responsible for explaining that stuff to other people. And that can cause some frustration, right? They become frustrated that the people below them don't understand the things they do, or don't understand it as quickly as they do. And this is where we start to lean into things like micromanagement, where you say like, oh, you don't get it, I'll just do it myself. I'll just take it on. They keep taking on more and more of these duties. And that's when we get burnout, right? When the manager's just like, oh gosh, I can't do this anymore. This is impossible. And the reason is because that, it's a process where they start by trying to explain things to people. The people don't get it. They get frustrated. So they do it themselves, and then they get burnt out. That's a major problem. So we have these three weaknesses. How do we make sure that doesn't happen? I think there's a couple different things we need to talk about. We need to talk about it first from the company perspective and the HR perspective, and then we need to talk about it from the individual manager perspective. So from the company perspective, the first thing you have to do is make sure you're looking for the right traits in leaders. You're looking for that technical competence, but can they explain that technical competence? Do they like to explain that technical competence, right? Like that, I think that's really important. Are they showing some signs that they want to go beyond that, right? It can't be just, oh, this person solves problems faster than anybody else. That's a start, that's important, but that's not what you need them to be doing. And so I think just making sure you're thinking about the traits that you're looking for when you're considering promoting somebody to people manager, and making sure you're not purely saying, oh, they're the best engineer, so let's promote them. You need to think about those other things as well. The second thing that a company needs to do, quite simply, this is what I live and breathe every day. They need to give people support when they make that transition. The thing I always like to say, it's not that managers are bad, They just don't know what they're doing, right? It's not that they're bad, they're ignorant. I don't know, that's probably going to go off really poorly, but I said it, there it is. So, deal with it. We, companies, HR professionals, have a big role in making sure that we're giving a pipeline of tools, support, development, programming to take these engineers and say, hey, congratulations, you're moving to this new role. It is a new role now. These are the new expectations. These are how we expect you to fulfill those expectations. Giving people that roadmap is really, really essential if you want to make sure the superpowers don't become weaknesses. Now, for individuals, if you're a manager and you want to make sure that you're not falling into these weaknesses, I think the number one most important thing to remember is just that now that you're a people manager, it's not about you anymore. It's not about what you can do anymore. It's about what your team does. The best way this was described to me recently is when you're an engineer, your goal is always to be the one up at the blackboard, right? You're the one writing the equations, explaining the solution. And when you become a manager, you're the person in the back of the room asking questions. If you can remember that transition and keep that in mind, I think it's really going to help, because obviously you need to be technically competent to ask the question, to ask good questions, but you're not the one up at the board anymore. So that's going to help make sure that you maintain your technical abilities, but you don't let it fool you into just solving technical problems, right? You have to work with you. It's about what you can help the team accomplish. And so you're going to focus on making sure the team is working well together. And that's all aspects of the team. That's both technical and emotional. And then you're also going to make sure that you're taking the time to explain things to folks, because again, it's about what they're doing, not what you're doing. So if you can just keep front of mind the fact that now that you are a manager, it's not what you can do, it's what you can help your team do. I think that's going to go a long way to make sure you don't let these superpowers of yours become your greatest weaknesses. I hope you found this episode helpful. If you did, please make sure you subscribe so you never miss a future episode. And if you are someone responsible for developing managers in your organization, whether it's the entire organization or just a part of it, I would love to talk to you. Please reach out to me via email at matt@bettereverydaystudios.com. I would love to chat and see if there's a way that we can make your managers better. With that, I will see you next time on the Leadership Launchpad.